Are rising authoritarianism and political violence blowback from the United States' actions abroad? And with Donald Trump casting doubt on the integrity of the upcoming midterms, will there be free and fair elections this coming November? This week on UpFront, I'll be asking those questions to journalist and author Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges, thanks so much for joining me again on
Not at
UpFront.
all, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Always good to see you. You've been talking a lot about the authoritarian measures taken by Donald Trump in places like Minnesota. You refer to it in your writing as an imperial boomerang. What does that mean?
I'm referring to a book, Discourses on Colonialism by Aimé Césaire, where he talks about the mechanisms that imperial powers use to subjugate those abroad. He talks about the way the French repressed the Algerians or the British repressed the population in India, or the way the imperial powers oppressed the blacks in Africa. And he said that eventually the building of that machinery of repression migrates back. And he's referring specifically to the rise of fascism in Germany, and that the mechanisms that the Gestapo and the fascists, brown shirts, used in Germany was not unfamiliar to anyone who had suffered under British colonialism or French colonialism or German colonialism, of course, in modern-day Namibia with the genocide of the Herero and the Namakwa. So, and that's also a point that Thucydides makes with the rise of the Athenian Empire and the decline of Athenian democracy. Thucydides writes that the tyranny that Athens imposed on others, it finally imposed on itself. And that is precisely what we are seeing. As the empire hollows itself out, the tools of subjugation that are intimately familiar to Palestinians, for instance, migrate back to the homeland. That's militarized police, wholesale surveillance, and then the rise of these very frightening paramilitary forces that have the ability to carry out acts of lethal violence with impunity. And that is replicated in every fascist, quasi-fascist state. That's what Modi does with members of the RSS. That's what you see in Erdogan's Turkey. That's what you see in Sisi's Egypt. So, and these are forces, vigilante forces like ICE, unaccountable. You can't control them. And we had in Minnesota, in January, there were 96 court orders, all of which ICE has defied. That's very, very frightening. Once the machinery of justice is no longer able to control, once these people step outside of that legal system, then there's almost no going back, and that's where we are.
We're entering a midterm election year here in the United States, and polls show Republicans increasingly disappointed with the performance of the Trump administration. Given his denial of his loss in 2020 to Joe Biden and his recent remarks that, quote, Republicans should take over the elections in November, how fair and free do you think the November elections will be? And do you have any real fear that Republicans won't accept the results of the elections if they're not successful?
Well, this is Trump, of course, refused to accept the results of the race against Biden. He announced in the last race that if he lost, he would not abide by the decision. He would defy it. He has been very aggressive, along with the Republican Party, on a series of measures to essentially control the vote. Of course, we just saw Tulsi Gabbard go down and seize voting boxes in Georgia, right? It was Georgia. But there's all sorts of other, removing people from voter rolls, very stringent ID tests, the and then, of course, with the ICE crackdown, many people, especially people of color, are very reticent, are going to be very reticent. This is by design. So I think we have to take it very seriously. I mean, Steve Bannon is running around saying he will serve a third term, defying the Constitution. Elections are kind of meaningless to them.
Let me push back just a little bit, because what I'm hearing Republicans say so far is we'll find a way to do this constitutionally. We'll find a way to change laws. We'll find a way to circumvent the historical precedent by establishing a new precedent. Is that possible? Or are they actually going to say, yeah, we lost, we don't care? I mean, there's a big gap between changing the rules and saying we're not going to abide by them.
Well, right now they're trying to rig it. I mean, that's what you have with all of the gerrymandering, which is seen also gerrymandering by the Democrats, primarily in California, but I think also Utah. But they are trying to set up a system whereby they can't lose. How far will they go? I think with Trump, and I think his fear really boils down to being impeached. I don't know if the Democrats have the backbone to do it, but I think that is his fear. And so there's not many impediments. And I think we're seeing, the New York Times ran an op-ed piece the other day essentially raising the possibility that these midterm elections may be rigged, may not be fair. I think we have to take that threat or the possibility of that very seriously.
The last time you were here, you made it very clear that the authoritarian push or slide that we're seeing in the United States didn't start with Donald Trump. That's part of a longer trajectory that's in some ways bipartisan. Given that, how would a Democratic victory in the midterm affect the path we're on right now as a nation? Would it undermine some of the authoritarianism? Would it help us move in a different direction, or would it be more of the same?
Well, it would obstruct the power of Trump, potentially. So it would perhaps stymie much of his agenda. But the Democratic Party is part of the problem. It's the Democratic Party who gave us Trump by betraying the working class and selling their soul to corporate donors. So the rhetoric of the Democratic Party, warning of the rise of an authoritarian state, is correct. That is where we're headed. The problem is that the only solution is mass mobilization, such as we have seen in Minnesota. That is the only possible.
Not electing Democrats.
No.
How about impeaching Trump?
I don't think impeaching Trump, sure, if they get there, but whether the Democrats have the stomach for it, I don't know. The Democratic Party is a corporate indentured
They've
party.
impeached him before.
Yeah, and it didn't work. Although you could have gotten him on the first week on the emoluments clause. I think the problem with the impeachment process is they strip so many impeachable offenses because Democratic presidents have also carried out those offenses. So there was, I think Bruce Fein, the lawyer, drew up, I think there were 20 impeachable offenses. But when they did impeach him, they only selectively pick, unfortunately, the weakest, because the Democratic Party has also been guilty of those impeachable offenses, including ignoring the congressional oversight in terms of declaring war. The Democratic Party has also been guilty of that violation. So the fundamental problem of the Democratic Party is that the one mechanism which can save us would see them swept from power, because nobody wants Jeffries or Pelosi or Schumer, any of these people. Their power is that they're the spigot. The money comes through them. They anoint the particular candidates. And so I think they've decided that they would rather remain in their privileged positions as the ship goes down, and the ship is going down. And that's really, so we really don't have an effective opposition party, because at this point, in order to halt the rise of this authoritarian, rapidly consolidating authoritarian state, it requires mass protests, sustained mass protests, strikes, sustained strikes, and really crippling the machinery of commerce and government not through nonviolence. That is our only hope. But the Democratic Party knows that the leadership would be completely swept aside, and so they won't support it.
Talk to me about, at this juncture in history, what the mass mobilization that you've talked about would look like. In places like Minnesota, we see it. We see people in the street, on the ground, literally putting their bodies on the line. In other cities or states, the political landscape's a bit different. How does it play out in your mind?
Well, as long as it's localized, they can crush it. That's the problem. And we really don't have, let's go back to Weimar Germany. You had the Communist Party, which was a counterweight to the fascists. And as a party, they were able, up until Hitler came to power in 1933, carry out all sorts of mass movements, strikes. I mean, there's a famous story where I think Hitler sends Goebbels to Berlin. Berlin is very hostile to the Nazis. They're about to carry out a strike, and Goebbels tells Hitler, we have to support this strike or all our credibility is gone. But we don't have an alternative party, that we don't have a unified or an organized left, unlike the 1930s with the breakdown of capitalism. And so that's what worries me, that we're in a very precarious position. And if we can't build a national resistance, if it's Minnesota here, Los Angeles here, they can deal with those local brush fires. They can put those out.
Should we only think about ICE as a brush fire, or is it symptomatic of a bigger national problem that might be more unmanageable?
I think ICE is going to be the enforcer, and of course they're building with this massive budget. They now have a budget larger than any other federal law enforcement agency. All of these detention centers are not going to be limited in any way to the undocumented. I think they've even made that clear. Trump and those around him are quite open about even calling the Democratic opposition traitors. I mean. And so that if we can't break that paramilitary force, because that is the force by which they will exert not only control but instill terror, then I don't know. But I mean, in terms of other issues, yeah, I mean, the social inequality, which is what gave rise to Trump, the fact that the Democratic Party signed on for deindustrialization, 30 million mass layoffs, hollowing out just about every American city are all post-industrial wastelands. That is what created Trump. And the Democratic Party, number one, still hasn't accepted its responsibility or its culpability. And number two, with the exception of maybe Bernie Sanders, and he's not a registered Democrat, they have never offered anything viable. I mean, it looks like they're going to run on the midterms. And remember, they did a internal study, the DNC, which they won't make public. You had the Harris campaign on Gaza. 77% of registered Democrats wanted to cut arms to Israel. She didn't care because they're owned by AIPAC. So. I think it was Fritz Stern, I can't remember anyway, one of these scholars of fascism said that fascism is always born out of a bankrupt liberalism. So that bankrupt liberalism is almost as dangerous as the fascist movement itself.
Let's talk about the media, specifically the role that legacy media has played in the first year of Trump 2.0. We've seen a change of leadership at CBS. We've seen people like Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon and the Washington Post, at Trump's inauguration. Major outlets are settling what many would call spurious lawsuits with Donald Trump, making him lots of money. How complicit is legacy media with the Trump administration and its current crackdown?
Pretty complicit. And I watch the kind of daily debacles at CBS closely with sheer delight because Bari Weiss, who's been appointed the news director, is a human hand grenade. A lot of this had to do with the coverage of the genocide, and CBS, like all of the legacy media, could not amplify Israeli Hasbara or lies fast enough. But in the eyes of really fervent Zionists like Weiss or Larry Ellison, who bought CBS, they weren't obsequious enough. But what they're doing is destroying what little credibility they had left. The legacy media no longer examines power in any serious way. I think, I'm an old school newspaper, New York Times reporter, not New York Times, we can spend a whole another show critiquing the Times. But it's the collapse of the media system, and of course, along with it has come the collapse of their credibility and their viewership, and rightly so. And people are seeking out alternative forms of information. I mean, I have a Substack, and lots of other people have essentially walked out of, I mean, I used to come out of the mainstream, walked out of the mainstream to continue to do the kind of work that we think is important. So, yeah, the media has been, I mean, even though you have a deep hostility in places like CNN towards Trump, they will attack Trump as a figure, but they actually won't attack the corporate system or the oligarchic class that is behind Trump because they're owned by them.
And it's not just legacy media that we need to be having a conversation about. I'm thinking about companies like TikTok, whose U.S. Operations came under U.S. control earlier this year through that forced sale to a consortium that includes Trump allies.
Of course.
Very quickly, we start to hear conversations, complaints, even about editorial censorship. Against the backdrop of this kind of media landscape, should we be worried?
Yeah, they're shutting down the media, so they're going after the alternative media, shadow banning. So I have, anytime I do a show on Gaza, on the genocide, I'm immediately demonetized on YouTube. And that is just a kind of reminder. If you want to make any money off of you, they still run ads, so I guess they get to keep it. So they're more and more intrusive, as you pointed out with TikTok, and so now they're going after the alternative media as well.
As we talk about the media, I'm thinking about the newest revelations about Epstein. Lots of names have come up. Lots of powerful people have been implicated. Lots of questions have been raised. What are you making of this?
Well, I read some of the emails, which are kind of fascinating because it's a window into the big club. And it doesn't matter whether you're a philanthropist or the president of Harvard, like Larry Summers, or David Copperfield, or they're all part
Noam Chomsky.
Noam, yeah, I don't know what Noam's a friend. I don't know what Noam was doing there. But it's a big club, which you and I are not in.
For sure.
And it's one awash in money and awash in power. And it is, by its nature, abusive. It objectifies those outside the club, including, of course, girls and women. And
especially girls and women.
Especially girls and women. So that's and I think I think one of the reasons it's resonated among Trump's base is because sexual assault is so widespread in the United States. So many girls and women have suffered. I mean, when I did my book on the Christian right, American Fascists, the Christian right and the War in America, I spent time at a pro-life weekend, quote-unquote pro-life weekend, with 400 women, and post-abortive sisters, they were called. But when I went around and did the interviews, every single one had suffered sexual abuse. Now, it was anecdotal, but I think the numbers are high, and I think that those people who look at this power elite as essentially amoral and predatory, they're not wrong. And it's this power elite which crosses party lines, which includes all of the people in the upper echelon of society, and that's why they're so selective in terms of even what they put out.
So what's the lesson there? If we look into these revelations, and regardless of what's true and not true for the moment, we see people on both sides of the political aisle. We see powerful people with lots of money. What does that say about the state of American democracy? What does it say about the political system? I mean, does it tell us anything to know that there's such a diversity of powerful white men at the top of this chain oftentimes?
Yeah, I mean, the American democracy is atrophied. I mean, the Democratic Party doesn't even function as a political party. Its base is irrelevant. It trots out maybe people for a convention as props. But no, democracy is atrophied and died a long time ago. And these people are incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful, and unaccountable, and they function in the same way that every other despotic, incredibly powerful, I'm talking about white men in particular, that's the way they've always functioned. I mean, what the Kennedy White House, as Cy Hirsch pointed out in The Dark Side of Camelot, I mean, he was, had young girls all over the place. So, and I think that's what the Epstein, the real, power of the Epstein revelations is that it has exposed who these people are. And you see them in the emails, the way that they interact and the crude jokes and they're always flying off to Davos or somewhere. And it's just, and because they're surrounded by publicists and lawyers and their public face bears no resemblance to their private face, their internal interactions with each other, and that's what the Epstein files have provided for us. I mean, they're really scum, and the Epstein files have exposed that.
I want to turn to foreign policy for a minute. Donald Trump started this year with a very busy, ambitious even, foreign policy agenda. I'm talking about the abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. I'm talking about his attempts to acquire Greenland. I'm talking about threatening war against Iran. In addition to being busy, there's an argument that he's trying to distract from the domestic problems here that he's wrestling with, whether it's the economy, whether it's immigration issues and controversies. What do you make of the argument that his foreign policy actions are just an attempt to distract from what's happening at home?
That probably gives Trump, I mean, I don't think Trump is that cognizant of reality, actually.
Are his advisors?
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
They're very Machiavellian and very frightening. I think he's come to relish that power. He likes it. He likes threatening Iran. He likes cutting off oil to Cuba. He likes carrying out a war crime. Let's be clear of what the kidnapping of Maduro was. That was an act of war, not declared by Congress. Congress wasn't even told in advance about it. He is provided cover for the genocide in Gaza through a sham peace plan, which I think all of us were stunned to see the Security Council, with the exception of China and Russia, who abstained, endorse. It's not a serious plan. Almost every point is a violation of international and humanitarian law, Palestinian sovereignty. It was an appalling document, but they're still killing. They don't kill on the numbers that they were killing before, but they're blocking fuel, they're blocking construction materials, they're blocking tents, etc. So Trump, remember Trump not long ago talked about increasing our Pentagon budget to $1.5 trillion. I mean, it's already $1 trillion. I mean, the whole thing's half of all discretionary spending. Arnold Toynbee, when he writes about the decline of empire, cites uncontrolled, unregulated, unchecked militarism as the death blow of all empires. And the Pentagon is just, the war industry is just a state within a state, which again goes back, it has complete bipartisan support. So I think Trump is by nature bellicose and a bully, and you see it in terms of his behavior domestically, but I think we're seeing it in terms of his behavior internationally. I think that what we're seeing is, this gets into another issue, but the ascendancy of China. And not just economically, but in terms of its military reach, with the decline of the American empire. So empires, when they decline, they carry out and acts what the historians call micro-militarism, but they seek to regain a lost hegemony through catastrophic military adventurism, which is what we saw in the Middle East for 20 years. Having worked in the Middle East for 7 years and spent a lot of time in Iran, a war with Iran is not going to be good for us or for Israel. And you think we would have learned our lesson in Afghanistan and Iraq, or you can go back to Vietnam. But that is a characteristic of late empire. All of those people who carried out the 20-year debacles in the Middle East, none of them have been held accountable. I mean, they're all running Raytheon or sitting on the board of Raytheon or something. So the self-corrective measures that are built into a functioning democracy have been taken from us. We don't have them.
Christopher Hedges, thank you so much for joining me on UpFront.
Thanks, Mark.